The next one is rule utilitarianism, which is proposed by John Stuart Mill. So maybe it has been proposed against the drawbacks or weaknesses of active utilitarianism, maybe. John Stuart Mill argues that we ought to adopt those moral rules which, if followed by everyone, if everyone does that, will lead to the greatest increase in total happiness of people. Yes, we're still checking for the grand total, but in a society as a whole, what if everyone does that? Okay, so a rule means a universal adoption, which leads to great happiness. We're still focusing on the consequence of actions here. That's the idea. Let's evaluate the scenario using rule utilitarianism. It is taken from the textbook. In August 2003, blaster worm had been spreading around the world. It was exploiting a security hole in Windows operating system, resulting in your computer rebooting every few minutes. It was a very disturbing worm. I remember that. I had been infected as well. And then came the Nachi worm. It was a counter worm. If it finds a security hole in your system, it destroys the blaster, in fact, and applies the missing patch from Microsoft website automatically. You say that it's very interesting, and this is just an evil worm, and this one is the counter worm against good worm against this blaster worm. So, what Nachi did was good, or developers of Nachi did good here? Let's see. If we generalize this, or what if everyone... so when you see a bad worm, release another worm which is a good one to destroy this one. Like if you accept it as an universal principle. What happened in this particular situation? 2 ATM machines were disabled and 2 financial centers have been affected because of the reduced usefulness of internet with traffic when Nachi worm was published. As you see, not much of harm, but what if you generalize this? Now you analyze the case. What if it will be a general principle here? And there can be bugs in benevolent worms, like good-willed worms. That can be, I mean, how can you know that those worms will be programmed perfectly? There can be bugs in them too. And there will be an admin burden as well. Whenever they encounter a new worm, security experts will try to analyze, is it harmful or beneficial? I mean, are you crazy? Considering that these are the negative costs, okay. The positive costs was, okay, it was nice working good against blaster, for example. Maybe if you analyze this situation in active utilitarianism, you will conclude that this action was right, maybe. I'm not sure, but we can conclude right. But here, if you use rule utilitarianism here and make the calculation by generalizing or universalizing this approach, like this is accepting this as a principle, then you can easily come out that balance is in favor, and what Nachi did was wrong here with respect to rule utilitarianism. That's the idea with rule utilitarianism. You can also think about in other scenarios using rule utilitarianism. Who should get the kidney machine? Look at this. Please read this, written by M.J. Langford. Who should get the kidney machine? Suppose that there is a, resource problem when the number of patients who need a resource exceeds the supply. God forbid. This happened in Italy in corona outbreak, for example. There were limited ventilation machines, and they were selecting patients who would get the access to, and then they use some criteria like, okay, the people who are younger maybe, or the people who are doctors, the people who are blah blah blah. They were using some criteria for selecting patients. Well, I mean, just try to evaluate this scenario using rule utilitarianism here. It's like an exercise for you. Do it yourself. I put it here for you to exercise yourself. So what are the benefits of rule utilitarianism? Rule utilitarian calculus is simpler than act utilitarian calculus, as you see, because it is focusing on general terms and long-term consequences. No need to make it more detailed because you can generalize. It's good. And not every moral decision requires utilitarian calculus. When you generalize something, you may end up with no need for a scale as well. So you can directly say that it is right or wrong. And here in this case, exceptional situations do not overthrow the moral rules. For example, in a particle situation, breaking your promise would be good with respect to act utilitarianism, but if you generalize it by rule utilitarianism, there will not be those exceptions. And you focus on the typical results here, like 100 times you bring flowers to patients in the hospital, in 90 times there will not be any problems, but in 10 of them there will be some allergies. You focus on the typical results here, which makes more sense maybe. And it appeals to a wide cross-section of society rather than a small group of people. And you conclude that, what if everyone does that? Maybe a bit similar to Kantianist approach here, deontologism here, because Kant was universalizing this as well. Here, we need to address the case against utilitarianism in general, but both act and rule are discussed here. Those disadvantages hold for both of them. There is a single scale for calculation. Be careful. You converting them to a single unit, dollars for example. It is in fact adding up apples and oranges, not different from that. Because there's a transformation problem here. Just return to our road construction example. But what if it results in 15 divorces because of disbanded families, for example? You can transform into court costs. How much court costs in dollar you can calculate, but what about splitting itself in dollars? Like a family with a divorce in dollars. It's not easy to transform this, for example. And it is ignoring the unjust distribution of good consequences. Be careful. Everyone gets 100 is worse than one get nothing and one get 201. As you see, it's not about the even distribution of resources. You just check the grand total here. You do not care about the distribution of the resources between people here. If you want to take care about it, you should check Rawls' theory of justice. We will see it in social contract theory. Here you can argue that, to counter this, we should act so that the greatest amount of good is produced, and we should distribute the good as widely as possible. Now there is a conflict here. You cannot say this because it's not pure utilitarianism anymore. It results in resolving conflicts between people or between approaches, which introduces us the principle of justice. We will discuss this in another ethical theory. But in the end, the rule utilitarianism is treating people equally as well and explaining why an action is right or wrong. How we explain why? Remember? Why this is right or wrong? It's pretty easy. Not easy, but pretty straight. Here is why. Because I put that on the scale and concluded that it is good or bad. This is why. So it's answering this question, why, in a different way. Okay? What was Kant's answer to question why? It was using categorical imperative, right? Categorical imperative had two different formulations, and it should be aligned with those formulations as well. Then you conclude that an action was right or wrong. But anyway, so we can say that rule utilitarianism is a rational, ethical theory that we can use as well. Okay, we added to our pack.